The night my wife's family threw me out into freezing rain, I thought I had lost everything except my German Shepherd Knox. Then I opened the last letter Claire ever wrote to me and followed a forgotten road into the mountains. What Knox found beneath that ridge was not a fortune. It was a secret powerful people had buried for more than half a century, and somehow my dying wife knew I would be the one forced to uncover it. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about loyalty, courage, justice, and the bond between veterans and the dogs who refuse to leave their side, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support gives us the motivation to keep bringing you stories worth sitting down and listening to. The night my wife's family locked me out, the rain was turning to ice. Not snow, ice. It coated the stone steps, the bare branches, the hood of my truck, and the black iron gate behind me, until everything on the Bellamy property looked sealed beneath glass. I remember standing there with one duffel bag at my feet and my German Shepherd pressed against my right leg. His name was Knox. He had stayed beside me through 2 deployments, one helicopter crash, a roadside blast that took part of my hearing, and every bad night that followed. That evening he was the only member of my family who had not decided I was disposable. Margaret Bellamy stood beneath the covered porch 20 yards away. She was my mother-in-law, or at least she had been while Claire was alive. She wore a dark wool coat and held herself so straight that grief could not seem to bend her. Claire had been dead for 7 months. Cancer had taken her before either of us learned how to say goodbye properly. I had spent those 7 months believing the Bellamys and I were grieving the same woman. I was wrong. Margaret looked at the bag beside my boots. "That is everything that belongs to you." I stared at her. Everything. Her son Randall stepped out behind her. Randall was Claire's older brother. He had inherited the family coal company, the house, the lawyers, and apparently the authority to decide which memories I was allowed to keep. He tossed a cardboard box onto the wet driveway. The bottom split when it landed. My Navy medals spilled across the ice, slid beneath my truck. Knox lunged forward. I caught the handle on his working harness before he got more than 2 steps. "Leave it," I whispered. He stopped, but he did not take his eyes off Randall. Randall smiled. That smile almost got through 20 years of discipline. "Almost. You should listen to your dog," he said. "He has better instincts than you." I bent down and collected the medals one by one. I did it slowly because my left hand had begun shaking. That happens sometimes when anger and memory arrive together. Randall noticed. Of course he noticed. "There," he said to his mother. "That is exactly what I was talking about." Margaret looked away. I knew what they were building. Unstable veteran, combat trauma, dangerous temper, unreliable judgment. They had been saying those words quietly for weeks. Now they were saying them with lawyers listening. I stood and dropped the medals into the torn box. "I am not here for your company." Randall stepped down one stair. "You are not getting Claire's shares. I did not ask for them. You are not getting this property. I did not ask for it. You are not getting anything." That one landed. Not because of the money. Because he said it like Claire herself had belonged to them, and I had only been borrowing her. Knox leaned into my leg. Pressure against the knee. Steady, present. He knew the signs before I did. I put my hand between his ears. His fur was cold and damp. My breathing slowed. Margaret finally looked at me. "You married into a family you never understood, Evan." My name seemed good enough when Claire was alive. Her face tightened. "Do not use my daughter to manipulate me." I stared at her for several seconds. Then something inside me simply stopped fighting. I had spent years kicking through doors because someone on the other side needed me. I had crossed oceans for men whose mothers would never know my name. But there are doors you cannot force open without losing whatever dignity you have left. The Bellamys had closed theirs, so I picked up the duffel. Knox moved with me. Randall called after us, "There is one more thing." I turned. He held up a small wooden box. I recognized it immediately. Claire kept it in the bottom drawer of her bedside table. My chest went tight. Randall studied it. For once, we agree, he threw it. I caught it against my chest. Barely. Knox barked once. Sharp. Randall stepped back. I opened the box right there in the freezing rain. Inside was Claire's wedding ring, a photograph of the two of us on the North Carolina coast, and a brass key I had never seen before. There was also an envelope. My name was written across it. Evan, just that. Claire's handwriting. I forgot Margaret. I forgot Randall. I forgot the rain running down the back of my neck. For 1 second, I could hear Claire in our kitchen again. She used to write my name on grocery lists when she wanted to make sure I actually read them. Evan, buy coffee. Evan, do not forget dog food. Evan, this means you. My thumb moved over the ink. When did you find this? Margaret's expression changed, only slightly. But I saw it. Fear. Randall answered too quickly. It was among her things. You opened it? No. Knox growled. Randall glared at him. I looked back at Margaret. She was staring at the brass key, not at the envelope. The key, and suddenly I knew she had seen it before. Where does this go? Margaret folded her arms. I have no idea. Another lie. I had spent enough years questioning frightened men in dangerous places to recognize a lie that arrived before the question was finished. I placed the envelope inside my coat. Good night, Margaret. Randall laughed. Where are you going to go? I walked toward my truck. He had asked the right question. I had no apartment, no house, almost no savings. Claire's medical care had eaten through what I had put aside. My transition out of active service had gone badly. For months, I had been living in the guest's house on Bellamy Land because Claire had made me promise not to isolate myself after she died. Now even that was gone. I opened the passenger door. Knox jumped inside. Before I climbed behind the wheel, I looked back at the house one final time. Margaret was still watching me. Randall had gone inside. The front doors closed behind him. The lights were warm. The windows glowed. For 5 years, I had walked through those doors at Thanksgiving and Christmas. I had carried Claire through one of them when chemotherapy left her too weak to climb the stairs. Now I could have frozen to death in their driveway, and I was not sure anyone inside would have opened the door. I started the truck. The engine coughed. Knox looked at me. I know. It coughed again, then turned over. Best news I have had all night. His ears lifted. I drove away. The gate closed behind us. I did not look in the mirror. I made it 18 miles before I pulled into the parking lot of a closed roadside diner. Freezing rain clicked against the windshield. The heater worked, but only when it felt charitable. Knox curled on the passenger seat with his nose resting on my thigh. I took Claire's envelope from my coat. For several minutes I just held it. There are things you postpone because opening them will divide your life into before and after. I already had too many of those moments. The day my father died. The day I joined the Navy. The first time someone fired at me. The night the helicopter went down. The morning the doctor told us Claire's treatment had failed. I did not want another before and after. Knox lifted his head. All right, I broke the seal. There was one sheet of paper inside. Evan, if you are reading this, either I finally became brave enough to tell you the truth, or my family did exactly what I was afraid they would do. I stopped. Read that sentence again. And kept going. There is a place in Blackfern Hollow. My grandfather Silas took me there twice when I was a child. My mother made me promise never to speak about it again. You will need the brass key. Take the old county road east of Garrison, then follow the abandoned mining track until it ends at a red survey post. After that, the map will be useless. Trust Knox. I stared at the dog. Knox stared back at me. That is unsettling. His tail tapped the seat once. I returned to the letter. Grandpa used to say a good dog notices the truth before a frightened person is ready to see it. There is something in that hollow my family has spent decades pretending does not exist. I do not know everything that is there. I only know they are afraid of it. And Evan, if they ever throw you out, do not go back and beg them to let you in. Go where I am sending you. You once told me a man needs 1 square foot of ground where nobody can order him to kneel. Maybe this can be yours. I love you, Claire. For a long time I heard nothing except the rain. Then Knox pushed his head beneath my hand. I bent forward until my forehead rested against his. I wish she had told me. He stayed still. I wish she had told me everything. My voice broke on the last word. Knox licked my wrist. I laughed once through the pain. Yeah, I know. Under the letter was a hand-drawn map. Blackfern Hollow was in the southern West Virginia mountains, nearly 3 hours from where I sat. The road Claire marked had not appeared on any highway map I remembered. But I knew the region: old mining country, steep ridges, abandoned company roads, hollows where daylight disappeared early. Places built by men who dug into mountains because feeding their children mattered more than what the mountain might do in return. I should have waited until morning. I knew that. The roads were freezing. My truck was old. My shoulder hurt. I had slept maybe 3 hours in the previous 2 days. Every sensible part of my brain said to find a motel. But grief does strange things to the meaning of sensible. Claire had left me one road, so I took it. By midnight, the towns had disappeared behind us. The interstate became a 2-lane highway. The highway became a county road. The county road became broken pavement, squeezed between a black creek and a wall of trees. Ice shone in the headlights. Knox stopped sleeping. He sat upright, watching the darkness. I found the turn Claire had marked just after 1 in the morning. No sign, no streetlight, only 2 rusted posts and a strip of gravel disappearing uphill. I turned. Branches scraped both sides of the truck. A mile later, the gravel vanished beneath mud and frozen leaves. Another mile, and the road was barely a road. Then the headlights caught red paint. I stopped. A survey post stood crooked beside a fallen oak. The top had been painted red years ago. My pulse changed. This is it. Knox was already standing. I checked Claire's map. There was nothing beyond the post. No line, no arrow. Only 4 handwritten words: he will know where. I looked at Knox. You had better be smarter than I am. I clipped a lead to his harness. We stepped outside. The cold hit immediately. Not the clean cold of snow. Wet Appalachian cold. It crawled through seams and settled against bone. I took my pack. A flashlight, water, the letter, and the brass key. Knox put his nose to the ground. For several minutes he circled the red post. Then he stopped. His head lifted toward the trees. He pulled left. There was no trail. Knox. He pulled again. Harder. I trusted him. We entered the woods. The hollow swallowed the truck lights within 50 yards. After that, we had only my flashlight. We crossed a shallow creek, climbed a slope, past the collapsed frame of what might once have been a miner's cabin. Then Knox froze. His body went rigid. I stopped behind him. What is it? His ears turned toward the hillside. I heard nothing, then I felt it. Warm air. A faint current moving across my wet face. In freezing weather, Knox pushed through a wall of mountain laurel. I followed. Behind it, almost completely hidden beneath vines and stone, was an arched concrete entrance built directly into the ridge. Not a mine shaft. Something smaller, something deliberate. A rusted steel door filled the archway. At its center was a brass lock. I pulled Claire's key from my pocket. It fit. My hand stopped. There are moments when instinct tells you the world on the other side of a door is going to be different from the world behind you. Knox looked up at me. All right, buddy. I turned the key. Somewhere inside the mountain, a mechanism moved. Not rusted. Not broken, moved. A low electric hum awakened behind the concrete wall. Knox backed up 1 step. Then a narrow line of yellow light appeared beneath the steel door. I had expected darkness. I had expected an abandoned mine. I had expected a dead man's forgotten storage room. I had not expected electricity. I pulled the door open. Warm air rolled across us. Beyond it stretched a concrete corridor. Lights were burning along the ceiling. At the far end stood a desk. And on that desk was a clean white envelope. No dust. No mildew. No age stains. Someone had put it there recently. Knox growled. I raised the flashlight. From where I stood, I could read the name written across the front. My name, Evan Mercer. Then I saw the second line. It was a date. 3 days after Claire died. And that was when I understood something that frightened me far more than the mountain. Claire had not been the last person to know I would come here. I did not touch the envelope. Not at first. Knox stood slightly ahead of me, shoulders high, nose working the warm air that drifted through the concrete corridor. His growl was barely audible. That bothered me more than barking would have. Knox barked when he wanted the world to know something was wrong. He growled like that when he believed something was close, something he could not yet see. I kept one hand on his harness and stepped through the steel doorway. The lights overhead were old industrial fixtures, protected behind wire cages. They hummed softly and threw long shadows across the walls. The concrete beneath my boots was dry, completely dry. Outside, freezing rain had been soaking the mountain for hours. Inside, the air smelled faintly of machine oil, cedar, and something metallic. The corridor ran maybe 40 feet before opening into a larger room. The white envelope sat exactly in the center of the desk. I approached slowly. Knox moved with me. There were no footprints on the floor. No muddy tracks, no dust disturbed around the desk. That should have reassured me. It did not. I had learned overseas that a clean room could mean one of two things. Nobody had been there, or somebody had been very careful. I reached the desk. The envelope carried my full name. Evan Mercer. Beneath it was the date, 3 days after Claire died. I stared at those numbers in my memory, even though they were written out in ink before me. 3 days. I remembered that day. I had been sitting in a hospital parking garage because I could not make myself drive home. Claire's coffee mug was still in the cup holder. Her scarf was still on the passenger seat. Knox had been lying across my feet. I had spent 6 hours in that truck because going home meant admitting she would not be there. And while I was sitting there trying to understand how to keep breathing, someone had come into this mountain and left an envelope with my name on it. I reached for it. Knox pushed his nose sharply against my wrist. I stopped. What? He turned his head toward the corridor behind us. I listened. Nothing. Only the electrical hum. Then I heard it. A soft ticking. Regular. Not a bomb. I knew that sound well enough. It came from somewhere deeper inside the room. I swept my flashlight across the walls. Steel shelving lined one side. On the other stood old cabinets, filing drawers, and a map board covered with yellowed county survey sheets. At the rear of the chamber, a round pressure gauge moved slightly with each tick. A pipe ran from it into the mountain. Steam system, maybe. Geothermal. Something was keeping this place warm. That meant maintenance. And maintenance meant somebody. I looked back at the envelope, then opened it. Inside was a single card. Not Claire's handwriting. A man's, neat, old-fashioned. Evan, if you are here, then Claire is gone. I am sorry. My name is Thomas Vale. You do not know me. Your wife did. I was Silas Bellamy's foreman for 27 years. I promised him that if the family ever turned against Claire, I would bring the truth back into daylight. I failed him once. I will not fail him twice. There is a red ledger in room 3. Do not take it to the Bellamys. Do not call the company. Do not trust the county office. And if you hear the ventilation fans stop, leave immediately. Knox growled again. I read the last line twice. If you hear the ventilation fans stop, leave immediately. That was when I noticed them. A low rushing sound behind the walls. Fans, steady, constant. I had heard them when we entered but dismissed them as part of the electrical system. Now every nerve in my body focused on that sound. I turned the card over. There was one more sentence. Claire thought you would know what to do. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because Claire had always believed I knew what to do. Even when I did not. Especially when I did not. I slipped the card into my jacket. Room 3. Knox looked at me. Bad idea. His tail did not move. We searched the chamber. A narrow passage continued beyond the desk. 3 heavy doors stood along one side. Each had a faded metal number plate. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3. I moved past the first. Knox stopped. He sniffed beneath the door, then sneezed and stepped away. Chemical storage, maybe fuel, maybe solvents. Room 2 was locked. The brass key did not fit. Room 3 stood slightly open. I drew a slow breath. Stay close. Knox moved beside my left knee. I pushed the door. The hinges made almost no sound. Inside was not a vault, not a bunker, not treasure. It looked like an office somebody had abandoned halfway through a workday. A wooden desk, a green reading lamp, shelves loaded with binders, a rotary telephone, a cracked leather chair, one coffee cup, and on the wall a photograph. I stepped closer. Silas Bellamy stood in front of an old mining tipple with 6 other men. I recognized him from family photographs, Claire's grandfather. Tall, thin, severe face. Beside him stood a younger man I assumed was Thomas Vale. The photograph had been taken sometime in the late 1970s. All 7 men wore mining helmets. All 7 were smiling. But somebody had drawn a black circle around one seat. A man near the edge. I did not recognize him. Beneath the photograph, someone had written 3 words. He knew first. Knox walked toward the desk. His nose moved over the drawers. Then he scratched once at the lowest one. I pulled it open. Inside lay a thick red ledger. Thomas had told the truth. I lifted it onto the desk. The leather cover had darkened with age. No title, no company logo. I opened it. Names, dates, payments, mine numbers, land parcels. At first, I thought it was simple accounting. Then I began reading the notes in the margins. Collapsed shaft. Families compensated privately. County inspector paid. Water test altered. Medical reports redirected. I turned another page. The entries continued for decades. My stomach tightened. This was not a financial ledger. It was a burial ground made from ink. Page after page documented accidents that never appeared in official reports. Black lung cases hidden from insurers. Creeks poisoned by runoff. Families paid cash to remain quiet. Local officials receiving monthly payments. Inspectors accepting gifts. Doctors encouraged to describe mining illnesses as unrelated respiratory disease. The Bellamy Company had not simply made money from coal. It had made money from silence. I kept turning pages. Then I saw Claire's name. My hand stopped. Claire Bellamy. A date from nearly 15 years earlier. Beside it, requested access to Mercer Creek contamination records. Denied by family. Later entry, Claire returned with outside laboratory results. Silas ordered complete disclosure. Randall objected. Margaret objected. Board threatened removal of Silas. My heartbeat changed. Claire had known. Not everything. But enough. I read faster. Another entry appeared 2 years later. Silas Bellamy moved original environmental reports and injury records to Black Fern facility. Thomas Vale assigned custodian. Claire given emergency access key. Then a sentence underlined twice. If anything happens to Claire, assume the family has chosen the company over blood. I sat down. Knox rested his chin on my knee. I could hear Claire in my memory again. The arguments she used to have with Randall behind closed doors. The nights she came home angry but refused to explain why. The way Margaret once called her idealistic as though it were a disease. I had believed it was ordinary family tension money. Control, inheritance. I had been wrong. Claire was not fighting them over wealth. She had been fighting them over dead people, sick people. Families whose names would never appear in the Bellamy Christmas photographs. I turned another page, then another. The later entries were in a different hand. Thomas Vale. Silas died. Family recovered company records but not originals stored at Black Fern. Claire contacted me. Told her to wait. She refused. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Knox looked up. She never waited. That almost made me smile. Claire could be patient with frightened children, stubborn dogs, and broken veterans. She had no patience for cowardice. I kept reading. Then I reached the final entry. It had been written 8 months before Claire died. Claire believes her illness may be connected to exposure at Mercer Creek during childhood. Requested testing. Family told her not to pursue it. My throat tightened. I read the sentence again, then the next. Private physician identified unusual chemical markers consistent with prolonged heavy metal exposure. Records requested from Bellamy Mining. Request denied. The room seemed to tilt. Claire's cancer, every doctor had called it rare. Aggressive. Unlucky. One of those terrible things nobody could explain. But Claire had been investigating contamination near a Bellamy property where she spent summers as a child. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not grief, cold rage. The kind I trusted least. Knox sensed it immediately. He stood and pressed his body against me. I put both hands on his shoulders. Easy. I was talking to myself. I kept reading. The last full paragraph had been added just days before Claire died. Claire asked me to prepare the facility. She believes her brother has discovered she retained copies of the medical files. She does not believe Randall will hurt her. I do. I stopped breathing. For several seconds, I could not make myself look at the next line. Then I did. If Claire dies before she can deliver the evidence, Evan Mercer must receive it. He is not part of this family. That is why Silas trusted him, because he has nothing to gain from preserving our lies. I shut the ledger. My hands were shaking badly now. Knox whined. I know. I stood. We are leaving. There are times curiosity matters. There are times survival matters more. I had enough. A ledger. Claire's note. I needed copies. A lawyer. Federal environmental investigators. Somebody outside the county. Somebody beyond the reach of Bellamy money. I picked up the ledger. That was when the ventilation fans stopped. The silence was immediate. Total. The low rush behind the walls disappeared. The ticking pressure gauge slowed. Knox's head snapped toward the door. I froze. Thomas Vale's warning came back with perfect clarity. If you hear the ventilation fans stop, leave immediately. Knox. He was already moving. We entered the corridor. The lights flickered. Once, twice. Then steadied. I ran toward the main chamber. The warm air felt different, heavier. A faint odor had begun to spread. Rotten eggs. My military training identified it before my conscious mind did. Gas, hydrogen sulfide maybe. Something from the old mine workings. The ventilation system was not for comfort. It was keeping the facility alive. Move. Knox sprinted ahead. I followed. Halfway across the chamber, the steel entrance door slammed shut. I heard the locking mechanism engage. The sound echoed through the concrete. Knox barked. I reached the door and grabbed the handle. Locked. I inserted Claire's brass key, turned it. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The system had overridden the manual lock. The smell grew stronger. My eyes began to sting. Someone had shut down the ventilation. Not decades ago, not by accident now. I backed away from the door. There had to be another exit. Facilities like this required emergency access, especially one connected to mine tunnels. I ran back to the map board. County plans, drainage diagrams, ventilation lines. I tore one sheet free. Knox began coughing. That sound changed everything. Come here. He came immediately. I wet a cloth from my water bottle and pressed it loosely around his muzzle. It would not stop poisonous gas, but it might buy seconds against dust or particulates. My own throat had begun burning. I scanned the map. There, a service tunnel. Behind room 2, the locked room. I ran back. The brass key still did not fit. I kicked near the latch. Pain shot through my bad shoulder. The door held again. The frame cracked. Third time, it opened. Inside was a narrow equipment room filled with pipes, tools, and electrical panels. At the far wall, a steel ladder climbed toward a square hatch. Knox coughed again up. He looked at the ladder. Knox had climbed military obstacles before, but this was nearly vertical. There were steel shelves beside it. He jumped onto the first, then the second. I climbed behind him, lifting his hindquarters when he slipped. The gas smell was stronger now. My vision started narrowing. Knox reached the hatch. I pushed upward. Nothing locked from above. I hit it with my shoulder. Pain exploded down my arm. Again, the hatch moved half an inch. Cold air leaked through. Again, metal screamed. The hatch opened. Rain hit my face. I shoved Knox through first, then pulled myself out. We emerged on the hillside maybe 100 yards above the entrance. I collapsed in dead leaves. Knox lay beside me, coughing hard. I rolled him onto his chest. Breathe. He coughed. Then inhaled again. His breathing steadied. I put my face against his neck. Good boy. My own lungs burned. I stayed there until the night stopped spinning. Then Knox stood. Not steadily, but he stood. He turned downhill. Toward the road. His ears lifted. I heard it a moment later. An engine. Headlights moved through the trees below. Not my truck. A dark sport utility vehicle approached the red survey post. Its lights went out before it stopped. Knox growled. Two men stepped out. Both wore rain jackets, both carried flashlights. One carried a long object beneath his coat. They walked directly toward my truck. They knew where to look. One man shined his light through the driver's window. The other spoke into a radio. I could not hear every word, but I heard my name. Is here. Knox looked at me. I placed a hand over his harness. Quiet, the second man answered, whoever was on the radio. Then he said something that made the cold disappear. No sign of the dog, a pause, then understood. We'll check the facility after the purge cycle. Purge cycle. They had shut down the fans deliberately. They expected the gas to do the work, not scare me. Kill me. And Knox. I felt something inside me become very still. Not angry. Not afraid. Focused. The way I had felt years ago when a mission went bad and surviving depended on accepting one brutal fact. Nobody was coming to save us. One man walked toward the hidden entrance. The second stayed with the vehicles. I could have slipped away. Taken Knox, reached another road, called the police. That would have been the sensible thing. Then I looked at the red ledger beneath my jacket. If I ran without knowing who controlled this county, I might hand Claire's evidence to the same people whose names were written inside it. So I stayed. Knox stayed with me. We moved along the ridge above them, using trees and darkness for cover. The first man entered the laurel near the hidden door. The second stood beside my truck. He lit a cigarette. Careless, confident. That told me more than a uniform would have. He did not believe anyone out here could threaten him. Knox looked at me. I gave him a silent hand signal. Stay, he lowered himself. I moved downhill alone. 20 feet. 15. The man heard a branch. He turned. Too late. I caught his wrist before he could reach beneath his coat and drove him against the truck. His cigarette fell into the mud. He tried to shout. I covered his mouth. Do not. His eyes widened. He recognized me. That was useful. I twisted his arm just enough. Who shut down the ventilation? He shook his head. I increased the pressure. Who? Go to hell. I leaned closer. My dog almost died in there. Something in my voice changed his mind. He swallowed. We were told the place was empty. By who? I don't know. Wrong answer, I swear. He breathed faster. A woman called the operations manager. What woman? I never got a name. Then who is your manager? He hesitated. Knox growled from the ridge. The man looked toward the sound. Fear entered his face. Randall Bellamy. There it was. Not suspicion. Not grief-talking. A name. My brother-in-law had tried to Claire's hidden refuge into a tomb. I released the pressure slightly. When did he learn I was coming? I don't know. You knew my truck. Randall sent the plate number. That meant somebody had been watching the house. Maybe watching me for weeks. I looked toward the mountain entrance. Where is your partner? The man gave the smallest glance toward the laurel, and that glance saved my life. I turned. A flashlight beam cut through the trees. The other man came out fast. He saw us. His hand disappeared beneath his jacket. Knox! The dog launched from the ridge. He hit the man before the weapon cleared cloth. Both went down in wet leaves. The first man twisted free. I drove him against the truck again and stripped a compact pistol from his waistband. I stepped back, hands where I can see them. The second man froze beneath Knox. Knox's teeth were inches from his throat. Call him off. Hands, he raised them. I whistled. Knox released and backed toward me. Even after the exhausted, perfect control. I kept the pistol pointed toward the ground. I had no intention of shooting anyone unless they forced the issue. Phones, they hesitated now. Both phones landed in the mud. Keys, the vehicle keys followed. I picked them up. The first man stared at the ledger under my jacket. His expression changed. Not confusion. Recognition. You found it. I looked at him. How do you know what this is? He said nothing. The second man swore. The first man's face went pale. That told me the answer mattered. I stepped closer. How do you know about the ledger? His voice dropped. Because everybody has been looking for it since Silas died. Everybody who? He laughed once. Nervous, you really have no idea what your wife was involved in? My jaw tightened. Tell me. He looked past me toward the mountain, then back at me. Randall is the least of problems. Before I could ask what that meant, one of the phones in the mud began ringing. A name appeared. Margaret Bellamy. My mother-in-law. Neither man moved. The phone kept ringing. Knox looked at me. Answered. I said nothing. For 3 seconds I heard only breathing. Then Margaret spoke. Her voice was calm. Too calm she knew it was me. I wondered how long it would take you to answer. I stared at the 2 men. Did you send them? No. A pause. My son has always been careless. My fingers tightened around the phone. You knew about Black Fern? Yes. You knew what was in the ledger. Another pause. Yes. Did Claire know her cancer might be connected to Mercer Creek? This time the silence lasted much longer. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice had changed. The coldness was gone. Something worse had replaced it. Guilt, yes. My heart seemed to stop, and you never told me. Claire begged me not to. I do not believe you. You should. Why? Because the truth is worse than the lie you have already found. I looked toward the dark mountain. What truth? Margaret inhaled, then said 7 words I will remember until I die. Silas did not build Black Fern for records. I said nothing. He built it because of what they found beneath Mercer Creek. The connection crackled. My skin went cold. What did they find? Margaret answered, people. I almost thought I had misheard her. What? Not bodies, Evan. Her voice trembled. People who were still alive. And then the line went dead. For several seconds, I stood in the freezing rain with Margaret's dead phone pressed against my ear. People who were still alive. I looked at the 2 men kneeling beside the truck. Neither of them would meet my eyes now. Knox stood at my side, wet fur dark against his ribs, his breathing still rough from the gas. I lowered the phone. What did they find beneath Mercer Creek? The first man shook his head. I do not know. You recognize the ledger. That does not mean I know everything. I stepped closer. You knew enough to shut down the ventilation. His jaw tightened. I told you. We were ordered to clear the facility. With gas, we were told nobody would be inside. You saw my truck, he said. Nothing, Knox growled. The man glanced at him, then quickly looked away. The second man finally spoke. Mercer Creek was an old company settlement. I turned. What kind of settlement? A mining camp. There is no mining camp on the county maps. Not anymore. Rain tapped against the hood of my truck. Keep talking. He wiped mud from his cheek. My grandfather used to say there were families living along the upper creek before the Bellamy Company bought the valley. Coal miners. Uppy. A few farmers. How many? I do not know. Try maybe 50 families. And then the company closed the road. Why? I was not born yet. That is not an answer. He looked toward his partner. The first man said quietly, there was an accident. What kind? Nobody agrees, and give me the version they tell employees. His expression turned bitter. Fluting. I stared at him. A mine flood. A whole section of the valley. My military instincts started arranging pieces before my emotions caught up. Closed road. Missing settlement. Hidden medical records. Heavy metal exposure. Silas building a facility inside the mountain. Margaret saying they found people alive. I looked toward the dark trees. Where is Mercer Creek? The second man answered. About 6 miles east through the ridge. Road? Not one you can drive anymore. Trail? He nodded. Old haul route. I took their vehicle keys and threw them into the woods. Both men stared at me. You are going to walk back to the county road. You cannot leave us here. You almost killed me and my dog. We had orders. That sentence stopped working on me a long time ago. I pointed toward the road. Walk they did. Neither argued again. I waited until their flashlights disappeared through the trees. Then I knelt beside Knox. His eyes were clear, but he was tired. Too tired. I rubbed his chest. We can leave, he watched me. We can take the ledger. Find a federal office. Find somebody outside this county. And never come back here again. His ears stayed forward. I knew what Claire would have said. Not with words, with that look. The one she gave me whenever I tried to call caution wisdom. She had been terrified of something before she died. Terrified enough to leave a trail only I could follow. And now Margaret had finally cracked the door open. People who were still alive. I looked toward the ridge. Fine, Knox rose. Mercer Creek. The old haul trail began behind the abandoned facility and climbed hard through the trees. We moved slowly, not because the distance was impossible, because Knox was still recovering. Every few hundred yards I stopped and checked his breathing. He hated that. He would look at me as if I were insulting him. You inhaled poison. He sneezed. That is not an argument. His tail moved once. We continued. By dawn, the freezing rain had stopped. The clouds lifted just enough to reveal the Appalachian ridges stacked across the horizon. Dark, ancient, quiet. I had spent years in deserts where danger announced itself with heat, dust, and movement. These mountains were different. They hid things. They could bury a road in 10 years. A house in 20, a town in 50, 6 miles felt like 12. The old haul route crossed 2 washed-out bridges and disappeared beneath landslides more than once. Then, near mid-morning, Knox stopped. He stared downhill. I followed his gaze. Trees filled the valley, nothing else. Then I noticed the lines, stone, straight where nature preferred curves. I left the trail and descended. The first thing we found was a chimney. No house, only a brick chimney standing between oak trees. Farther down, another foundation appeared beneath leaves. Then another, a rusted bed frame leaned against a tree. A child's bicycle wheel protruded from the earth. This had been a town. Not a camp, a town. Knox sniffed along an old stone wall. I found a road beneath the leaves, cracked pavement. Faded center stripe. The forest had nearly swallowed it. I pulled Claire's map from my jacket. No Mercer Creek. No roads, nothing. Somebody had not abandoned this place. Somebody had erased it. We followed the pavement deeper into the valley. A church appeared first. White paint mostly gone. Roof collapsed. Bell tower leaning. Beside it stood a cemetery. I stopped at the first headstone. A family name. Then another. Dozens. Many died within the same 3-year period, not miners killed on one bad day. Children, women, old men, entire families. The dates clustered together. Knox moved toward the far edge of the cemetery. He began pawing at the ground beside a broken stone marker. I walked over. A metal plow fallen down beneath leaves. I turned it over. Property acquired by Bellum's Consolidated Mining. Restricted Industrial Zone. The date was more than 60 years old. I read it again, then looked at the graves. Industrial Zone. That was how the company described a cemetery. I felt anger rising again. But underneath it was something worse. Recognition. This was how people disappeared without physically disappearing. Change the name. Close the road. Buy the land. Move the records. Wait. Eventually memory becomes rumor. Rumor becomes nothing. Knox barked. I turned. He stood in the road, facing farther into the valley. What? He moved. I followed. Half a mile later the creek appeared. Mercer Creek, except the water was wrong. The surface looked clean, but the rocks beneath carried streaks of orange and black. Mineral drainage. I knelt near the bank. Knox tried to drink. I grabbed his harness. No, he looked offended. Trust me. Upstream stood the remains of an old processing building. Concrete walls, broken windows, one steel tower still standing. The Bellamy name had once been painted across the side. Only a few letters remained. We entered through a missing door. Inside, everything smelled damp and metallic. Old equipment sat rusted beneath collapsed beams. Knox moved across the floor with his nose down. Then he stopped in front of a concrete wall. No doorway. Nothing obvious. He scratched once. I swept my flashlight along the concrete. A rectangular seam appeared beneath layers of grime. Hidden door, no brass lock this time, a steel wheel. I turned it. Nothing again. The mechanism groaned. The wall moved inward. Cold air escaped, not warm air like black fern. Cold, dry. Knox stepped back. I aimed the flashlight into darkness. Concrete stairs descended beneath the building, of course. He looked at me. Apparently your mother was a bloodhound. We went down. The staircase ended at a corridor older than the Black Fern facility. Bare concrete, exposed pipes, no lights. At the end stood another door. This one carried a metal sign, medical observation. My stomach tightened. I opened it. Rows of iron beds filled the room. Maybe 30. Some still had rotted mattresses. Privacy curtains hung in strips. Glass medicine cabinets lined one wall. This had been a clinic, not a company infirmary, something larger. I found a clipboard inside a drawer. Patient numbers. Symptoms: skin lesions, respiratory failure, neurological tremors, vision loss, pregnancy complications, children with developmental problems. The dates matched the cemetery. I opened another drawer. Photographs. Black and white medical photographs. Men with burns on their hands. Children with rashes around their mouths. A woman holding a baby whose skin showed dark lesions. I had seen war wounds. I had seen what chemicals could do. I still had to look away. Knox pushed against my leg. I put my hand on his head. They knew. That was the thing that broke something inside me. Not that people got sick. Not even that a mining company caused it. Accidents happen. Bad decisions happen. Human beings make terrible mistakes. But these beds meant the Bellamys had known. They had brought people underground, observed them, recorded symptoms, and then erased the town. I searched the cabinets. Most files were gone. One metal drawer remained locked. I used a broken piece of steel as leverage. The lock snapped. Inside were patient folders, again numbers instead of names. But someone had handwritten names beneath the codes later. Thomas Vale, maybe. I read them. Families from the cemetery. Then one folder stopped me. Bellamy Clare. My hands went numb. I opened it. The first page carried a childhood photograph. Clare. Maybe 8 years old, hair in braids. A missing front tooth. Smiling. The same smile she still had when I met her 30 years later. Beneath the photograph, exposure event. Mercer Creek drainage basin. Duration approximately 6 weeks. I sat down hard on the floor. 6 weeks. Claire had spent part of a summer here. She had told me stories about summers with her grandfather. Catching fireflies, swimming in creeks, eating tomatoes straight from gardens. She had never told me where. Maybe she had not known. Maybe she had been too young. The medical notes continued. Elevated arsenic, lead, cadmium, long-term monitoring recommended. Family declined external reporting. I could not breathe properly. The next page contained Silas Bellamy's signature, not approving concealment, objecting to it. I read his handwritten note. This child is my granddaughter. If we hide this from her, we are no better than the men who poisoned the valley. Another signature appeared beneath his. Margaret Bellamy. I closed my eyes. Claire's mother had known. She had known Claire was exposed as a child. She had known there could be long-term consequences. And when Claire developed cancer decades later, Margaret stayed silent. That was the truth she had called worse than the lie. I kept reading. Final page had been added much later. Adult follow-up requested by patient. Private laboratory testing indicates historical exposure markers. Patient suspects relationship to current malignancy. Patient requests original Mercer Creek records. Family attorney denied access. There was a handwritten sentence underneath. Claire will not stop. Then another. Neither will Randall. I stood. Knox had moved to the far wall. He was sniffing a line of metal lockers, one in particular. He pawed it. I opened the locker. Empty. He pawed again. Nothing there. He scratched harder. I examined the back panel. Loose screws. I removed them with a tool from my pack. The metal panel came free. Behind it was a cavity in the concrete. Inside sat a small waterproof case. I pulled it out. The lid opened with 2 clips. A digital recorder lay inside. Old, but preserved. Beside it was a note. Evan, if you find this before I can explain everything, listen alone. Claire. I stopped moving. Knox sat beside me. My thumb hovered over the play button. Her voice. I had not heard Claire's living voice since the funeral. I still had old recordings. I could not play them. I had tried once, made it 3 seconds, then shut the phone off and spent the rest of the night on the kitchen floor. Now her voice waited inside this machine. I pressed play. Static. Then breathing, then Claire. If you are hearing this, I am probably gone. My knees nearly failed. I sat on the nearest bed. Her voice continued. Evan, I need you to know something before you decide what to do with the records. A pause. She sounded tired, very tired. I found out about Mercer Creek after my diagnosis. Knox rested against my shin. My mother knew about my exposure. My grandfather knew. Randall found out later. Grandpa wanted to disclose everything. My father and the board stopped him. Her breathing caught. I could hear her trying not to cry. I hated them when I learned that. Another pause. Then I found the original files. I leaned closer to the recorder. And that is when I realized they had hidden something even worse. I looked around the clinic. Worse, Claire continued. The contamination was not an accident. Every hair on my arms rose. The company ordered experimental waste buried in abandoned mine chambers beneath Mercer Creek. They were paid to take it. I shut my eyes. Government waste. Industrial waste. Maybe both, Claire said. Grandpa discovered it after residents started getting sick. He tried to stop the dumping. He tried to evacuate the valley. Her voice weakened, but the company had already taken too much money. Too many people were involved. Then she said a name I did not recognize. Look for Dr. Samuel Harlan. A pause. If he is alive, he knows where the final chamber is. The recording clicked. I thought it was over. Then Claire returned. Her voice was quieter now. Evan, there is something I did not tell you. I gripped the recorder. I met Dr. Harlan last year. A long silence. He showed me what is still beneath this valley. My mouth went dry. I wish I had never seen it. Knox's ears lifted. Claire took another breath. And if Randall discovers you have the red ledger, he will come for you. But he is not the person I am most afraid of. The recording crackled. Then Claire whispered, there is someone inside the federal government who has protected this secret since before I was born. My blood ran cold. Another pause, and I think they know who you are. The recorder stopped. The room went silent. I stared at it. Then Knox stood. His head turned toward the stairwell. A sound came from above, not footsteps, an engine. Then another door was closing. Voices. I killed the flashlight. Knox moved beside me. Through the ceiling, faint but clear, a man shouted, Mercer. I did not recognize the voice. Then came the second shout. We know you found Claire's recording. I looked at Knox. Nobody should have known that recording existed. Nobody except Claire. And maybe Dr. Harlan. A flashlight beam swept across the stairwell entrance. The man called again. This does not have to end badly. I put the recorder inside my jacket. Knox's body lowered. Ready, I whispered into his ear. Apparently they disagree. The beam moved closer, and somewhere behind us, beyond the rows of rusted hospital beds, I heard a sound I had not noticed before. 3 slow knocks from inside the wall. Knox turned instantly. 3 more, Knox answered from the darkness. Someone was down there with us. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps, pause, 3 more. Not pipes, not settling concrete. A person. Knox turned away from the stairwell and moved toward the back wall of the medical room. The flashlight beam above swept closer. One of the men shouted my name again. Mercer. I lowered myself behind a rusted bed frame and whispered to Knox. Find it. He moved immediately. Nose down, tail level. Focused. The knocking came from behind a bank of steel cabinets that had been bolted to the wall. Knox stopped at the last one. He scratched at the floor. I felt along the edge, nothing. Then my fingers found a gap behind the cabinet. Cold air leaked through it. There was another space on the other side. I looked toward the stairwell. A boot appeared at the top, then disappeared. They were moving carefully. Whoever these men were, they knew enough not to rush into a dark underground clinic after a former Navy SEAL and a working German Shepherd. That gave me seconds, maybe less. I braced my shoulder against the cabinet. Pain shot down my left arm. I pushed anyway. The bolts had rusted badly. One snapped, then another. The cabinet shifted 3 inches. Knox squeezed his muzzle into the opening and whined. Again I pushed harder. Metal tore away from concrete. The cabinet tilted. Behind it was a narrow steel door painted the same gray as the wall. No handle, only a thumb-sized hole. I put my finger inside. Found a latch, pulled. The door opened inward. A hand reached from the darkness and grabbed my coat. I nearly struck the person before I saw his face, an old man. Thin, white hair, deep-set eyes behind scratched glasses. "Turn off the light," he whispered. I did inside. Now Knox entered first. I followed. The old man pulled the door shut and slid a heavy locking bar into place. Darkness surrounded us. A moment later, Fred's emergency lamp came on. We stood inside a narrow maintenance tunnel. The old man looked at Knox, then at me. His expression changed. "Claire said the dog would be with you." My pulse stopped for half a beat. "Who are you?" He did not answer. Footsteps entered the clinic outside. Flashlights moved through gaps around the hidden door. A man said, "Check every room." The old man raised one finger to his lips. We stood without moving. Knox's breathing sounded too loud to me. So did mine. Metal drawers slammed outside. Glass broke. Someone kicked one of the beds aside. Then a voice came through the wall. "He has the recorder." Another voice answered. "Then bring Mercer out alive." A pause, and Knox tense. The answer came quietly. "If necessary." My hand tightened around his harness. The old man stared at me. Then he motioned toward the tunnel. We moved. The passage was barely wide enough for one person. Concrete gave way to rough stone after 30 feet. Old cables ran along the ceiling. The red lights were spaced far apart. Every few yards, faded medical numbers appeared on the walls. The old man walked with a limp, but he knew exactly where he was going. I followed him deeper beneath Mercer Creek. After several turns, we reached a steel ladder. He descended. Knox looked at me. "Go." He managed the descent with my help. At the bottom, another tunnel opened. This one was older. Brick walls, timber supports. The old man kept moving. Finally, we entered a small chamber. A cot, 2 battery lamps, canned food, water containers, medical supplies, a portable radio. Stacks of documents. Somebody had been living there. The old man shut the door behind us. Then he looked at me. "My name is Samuel Harlan." I stared at him. The name from Claire's recording. "Dr. Harlan." "Not you knew Claire." His eyes lowered. "Yes, you knew she was sick." "Yes." "You knew why." He looked back at me. "Yes." Something hard rose in my chest. I stepped closer. "You knew her illness could be connected to this place, and you let her spend years believing it was random." His jaw trembled slightly. "I did not let her believe anything. You stayed quiet. So did almost everyone. That is not a defense." "No." His answer stopped me. He did not argue. He did not make excuses. He simply looked old, not physically old, morally tired. Knox moved between us and sat, a barrier or a reminder. I could not tell which. Harlan motioned toward a wooden chair. "You need to hear the entire story. I need to get Claire's evidence out of this valley." "You will not get far." "Why?" "Because the men upstairs are not Randall Bellamy's contractor." I stared at him. "Then who are they?" Harlan said slowly. "They work for people Randall answers to." "What people?" He looked toward the ceiling. "The ones who turned Mercer Creek into a grave." I remained standing. "Start talking." He folded his hands. "In the early 1960s, Bellamy Consolidated owned most of the coal rights in this valley. Silas Bellamy was young then, ambitious. Not yet the man Claire remembered." I said nothing. "A federal contractor approached the company with an offer. There were abandoned shafts beneath Mercer Creek, dry, remote, deep enough for secure disposal. What were they dumping? At first, industrial waste. What kind? Metals, solvents, contaminated material from research facilities. And later, his eyes shifted toward mine. Waste from weapons-related programs." My stomach tightened. "Chemical? Radioactive?" "Some." I felt the air grow colder. "Silas agreed to it?" "Yes." There it was. The grandfather Claire loved. The man whose handwriting condemned the family. He had helped begin it. Harlan continued. "The money was extraordinary. Enough to expand the company across 3 states. And the town? Nobody was supposed to know. But people got sick." "Yes, how quickly?" "Within a few years." He leaned forward. "Livestock died first. Then wells changed color. Children developed rashes. Miners began collapsing underground. Pregnancies failed. People developed neurological symptoms nobody could explain. And the company knew. By then, yes. And they hid it." At first I stared at him. What changed, Liz? I almost laughed. He was the one who took the money. Yes, so what? He developed a conscience. Harlan held my gaze. Sometimes guilt is where conscience begins. That sounded like something Claire would have said. I hated that. Harlan continued. When Silas realized people were dying, he tried to end the disposal agreement. The federal contractor refused. Why? Too much material had already been buried. Too many agencies knew. Too many careers depended on nobody asking questions. So Silas threatened to expose them. Yes, what happened? They reminded him that Bellamy Consolidated had signed every transport manifest. Silas was trapped. If he exposed the government, he exposed himself. Harlan nodded as if reading my thought. He was guilty too. What did he do? He built Black Fern. I looked back toward the tunnel. As an archive. That made sense. Copies of records. Names, payment logs, laboratory reports, its photograph, transport manifests, medical files. He collected everything. And the underground clinic? That was mine. I looked at him sharply. Harlan's face tightened. I was a young doctor then. Bellamy paid me to monitor the families. Monitor them? I told myself I was helping. The anger came back. You put numbers on sick children. His voice broke. Yes, you watched them die. Yes, and you kept working. Yes. For the first time, Harlan looked away. I was a coward. The room fell silent. Knox lay down beside my boot. Harlan continued quietly. I convinced myself that if I stayed, I could document what was happening. That someday the records would matter. Did they? No, the honesty was brutal. People still died. Yes, families still disappeared. Yes, Claire still got exposed. His face changed. That wound reached him. Claire was 8 years old when Silas brought her here. Why? He wanted her to understand where the family's money came from. I could barely believe what I was hearing. He brought a child into a contaminated valley? He believed the worst sites had been sealed. He was wrong. Yes, what happened? She fell into Mercer Creek. I closed my eyes. There it was, Claire as a child. Braided hair, missing tooth, playing near poison she could not see. Harlan said she was in the water less than 2 minutes. And it was enough. We never knew for certain. You monitored her. For years. Margaret knew. Her father? Dead by then in Randall? Not until much later. I looked toward the stacks of documents. Why did Margaret hide it from Claire? Fear of what? The company collapsing, lawsuit. Criminal charges, public exposure. That sounds like greed. It became greed. Harlan rubbed both hands over his face. But at first, it was fear. I had learned something about fear during my service. It rarely stayed small. Feed it long enough, and it becomes a system, a culture, a family tradition. I thought about Margaret on that porch. Cold, controlled, looking at Claire's brass key. She had not been afraid of me getting an inheritance. She had been afraid of me opening a grave that had been sealed for 60 years. Why did Claire contact you? Harlan's eyes softened. She found her childhood medical file. When? About a year before her death. And she confronted you, yes. How did that go? For the first time, he almost smiled. Like being questioned by a very disappointed judge. That was Claire. I could hear her, Harlan continued. She wanted names, dates, proof. She wanted to know if her cancer was connected. And you told her? I told her I could not prove it. But you suspected? Yes, my chest tightened. She must have been terrified. She was. She never told me. She said you had already survived enough. I turned away. That hurt worse than anything Harlan had said. Claire had tried to protect me again, even while dying. I looked at Knox. She should have told me, Harlan said quietly. She knew. I turned. Knew what? That hiding it from you was wrong. He reached into a metal box beneath the cot. He removed another envelope. My name was written across it. Claire's handwriting. I did not take it, not yet. How many letters did she leave? As many as she thought you might need. My throat tightened. Harlan placed the envelope on the table. She came here one final time about 3 weeks before she died. I stared at him. She could barely walk, I know. You let her travel here? I tried to stop her. You failed. Yes. Again, no excuse. What did she do? She gave me that. He pointed to the envelope, and she made me promise to stay alive long enough to give it to you. A dull ache spread through my chest. You have been living underground since then? Not continuously. Why are you here now? Because Thomas disappeared. I froze. Vale? Harlan nodded. 5 days ago. My mind raced. Thomas had left the envelope inside Black Fern 3 days after Claire died. He had been protecting the evidence. Now he was missing. Dead? I do not know. Who took him? I suspect the same organization that sent the men upstairs. What organization? Harlan hesitated. I stepped toward him. Doctor, he exhaled. Continental Environmental Recovery. The name meant nothing to me. That sounds like a cleanup company. It is supposed to. And what is it really? A private federal contractor that has existed under different names for decades. Doing what? Containing scandals. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Cleaning sites sometimes. Destroying records? Often people. Harlan looked at me. He did not answer. He did not need to. I glanced at Claire's letter. You said there is a final chamber. Harlan's expression immediately changed. You heard the recording? Yes. Then Claire ignored my instructions. She had a habit of doing that. Evan, you cannot go down there. Why? Because Black Fern and this clinic contain evidence. And the chamber? He looked toward the stone wall. The chamber contains the crime. I said nothing. Harlan stood. His hands shook slightly as he crossed to an old mining map pinned behind the cot. He pointed to a section beneath Mercer Creek. Here. A network of tunnels spread beneath the valley. Most were marked collapsed or sealed. One section had been circled. That chamber was used for the final disposal runs. How large enough? That is not an answer. He looked at me. Roughly the length of 2 football fields. I stared at the map. What is sealed? Drums, equipment, transport containers, original federal markings. Enough to prove everything, more than enough. Then why has nobody destroyed it? They tried. How? Controlled collapse. I traced the map. But it survived, yes. Why? Silas altered the blasting plan. I looked at him. He protected it as leverage. So where is the entrance? Harlan shook his head. No. Claire wanted me to see it. She wanted you to have the evidence. She told me you knew where the chamber was, because she believed you would know when not to use information. A strange sentence. What does that mean? It means proof can save people. He paused, and proof can kill them. I stared at him. Who is still alive to protect? Harlan did not answer immediately. Then he walked to a filing cabinet and removed a thick binder. He opened it. Hundreds of them. Addresses, medical histories. Children. Grandchildren. Families who had once lived in Mercer Creek. The descendants. I looked at him. They still suffer health problems. Some do, and nobody knows. Most believe it was mining exposure, which is only part of the truth, yes. Then they deserve to know. I agree. So what are you afraid of? Harlan's eyes hardened. The chamber contains more than waste manifests. What else? Personnel files. I waited. Military personnel. My breathing changed. What military person? Harlan stared at me. The government did not only test disposal methods here. A terrible thought entered my mind. What did they test? Before he could answer, a loud metallic boom shook the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. Knox jumped to his feet. Harlan looked upward. Another boom. Closer. They found the access corridor. I pulled the pistol I had taken from the contractor. I am not staying trapped. Harlan moved toward a steel cabinet. You cannot fight them. I do not plan to. Another impact. The door behind us rattled. Knox growled. Harlan opened the cabinet. Inside was an old control panel, 3 switches, 1 red handle. What is that? Silas had emergency protocols. What kind? A way to seal sections of the mine. Collapse them? Not exactly. He pulled the red handle. Somewhere deep inside the mountain, machinery groaned awake. Then came a sound like thunder rolling beneath our feet. The lights flickered. The men in the tunnel shouted. A steel barrier slammed down somewhere behind us. Silence followed. Harlan exhaled. That bought us maybe 20 minutes. Where does this tunnel go? To the final chamber. I stared at him. You just told me I could not go. I changed my mind. What changed you? I almost laughed. You do not know me, Claire did. Another distant impact echoed through the mine. Harlan grabbed a lantern and an old canvas medical bag. Then he picked up Claire's letter and handed it to me. I put it inside my jacket. Lead the way. We entered the lower tunnel. Knox moved ahead. The passage descended for what felt like half a mile. The air grew colder. The walls changed from brick to raw rock. Old rail tracks appeared beneath our boots. Then Knox stopped. His nose lifted. He stared into darkness. Do you smell something? Harlan raised the lantern. Knox moved off the tracks. He began following the right-hand wall. 20 feet later, he stopped beside a pile of fallen timbers. He scratched. I helped move them. Behind the timbers was a narrow opening. A steel door stood beyond it, not old, not rusted. Modern. Harlan froze. That was not here. My hand tightened around the pistol. When were you last down here? 7 years ago. Knox sniffed beneath the new door, then backed away. His fur rose along his spine. A red light blinked above the frame. Power. Current power. Somebody had been maintaining the final chamber. I looked at Harlan. You said this place had been hidden for decades. It was. Then somebody found it. A speaker above the door crackled. Knox barked. A voice came through, calm, male, older. Dr. Harlan. Harlan went pale. The voice continued. I was beginning to think you had died. I raised my eyes toward the speaker. Then the man said my name. Commander Mercer. I had not been called that in years. Your wife created an extraordinary amount of trouble. Every muscle in my body tightened. Who are you? A soft laugh came through the speaker. You do not remember me. No, you should. I looked at Harlan. He looked terrified. The speaker crackled again. We met once, Evan. My stomach turned. When? Afghanistan. My grip on the weapon tightened. He continued, Province. My mouth went dry. That detail was not public. Not in the Bellamy files. Not something Claire's family knew, the voice said. You were part of the recovery team after the Kandahar transport incident. Images flashed through my mind. Burned vehicles, protective masks, men in suits who refused to identify themselves. A sealed cargo truck we had been ordered not to open. One of my teammates vomiting blood 2 days later. A report that disappeared before we returned home. I had spent years believing it was classified military material. The voice on the speaker lowered. The materials buried beneath Mercer Creek came from the same program. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Harlan whispered, Evan? I stared at the steel door. My past had just reached through 60 years of buried history and grabbed me by the throat. The voice continued. That is why Claire chose you. Knox growled. And that is why we have been watching you since the day you married her. I felt something inside me turn cold. Not fear, understanding. Claire had not accidentally married a man capable of protecting this secret. Somebody had noticed exactly who I was long before I ever found the brass key. The red light above the door changed from red to green. Locks disengaged one by one. The steel door began to open. Warm white light spilled into the mine. I raised the pistol. Knox lowered his body. Ready, Harlan whispered one word. Run, I did not. Because standing on the other side of that opening was a man I recognized. Older gray hair, expensive coat, but the face was the same. I had seen him 17 years earlier beside a burned convoy in Afghanistan. He had introduced himself then as a civilian advisor. He had watched 2 injured American sailors being carried away and showed less emotion than a man watching luggage unloaded from an airplane. Now he smiled at me. Hello, Commander. Behind him stretched the final chamber. Rows of sealed containers disappeared beneath white industrial lights. And painted across the nearest steel drum was the same symbol I had seen on the cargo truck in Afghanistan. The man spread his hands. My name is Adrian Cross. Then he looked down at Knox. And before this becomes unpleasant, you should know something. His smile disappeared. Randall Bellamy did not kill Claire. I stared at him. Cross stepped aside. Beyond him on a steel table lay a medical folder. Claire's name was printed across the front. Cross looked back at me. We did. For 1 second I heard nothing, not the machines. Not the ventilation, not Adrian Cross breathing, not Knox growling beside me. Only 4 words we did. I stared at the medical folder carrying Claire's name. My hand tightened around the pistol and my knuckles hurt. Cross watched me carefully. He was not afraid of the weapon. That told me he had prepared for anger, maybe even expected it. What did you do to her? Cross did not answer immediately. Behind him, the final chamber stretched deep into the mountain. Rows of steel drums, sealed containers, old transport crates. Some carried federal markings that had been painted over. Others displayed symbols I remembered from Afghanistan. Symbols I had spent 17 years trying to forget. Cross took one step backward. She became a liability. Harlan inhaled sharply beside me. I raised the pistol. Cross stopped. Choose your next sentence carefully. Knox moved forward. Cross glanced at him, then back at me. Claire was already sick when she began investigating Mercer Creek. I know she was dying, I know we did not give her cancer. The words were technically careful. That made them worse. What did you give her? Cross's eyes narrowed. Information. Try again. We accelerated what was already happening. The chamber seemed to contract around me. My pulse thundered in my ears. Harlan whispered, Evan, I barely heard him. What does that mean? Cross looked toward Claire's file. She discovered that Bellamy executives had maintained private medical monitoring on several descendants of Mercer Creek residents, including Claire. Yes, she found out her childhood exposure had been hidden. Yes, she wanted to expose it. Yes, and you stopped her. Cross folded his hands in front of him. We offered her alternatives. I almost laughed. What alternatives? Money, private treatment, protection for you. That last part hit me. For me? Cross nodded. She refused. Of course she had. I could see Claire sitting across from him, thin from treatment, exhausted, still looking a powerful man straight in the eyes and telling him no. My Claire. What happened next? Cross looked almost irritated by the question. Her treatment schedule gave us access. The pistol rose before I realized I had moved. Knox barked once. Harlan grabbed my arm. Evan, I shook him off. What did you put in her? Cross finally showed fear. Not much, but enough. A compound that interfered with her medication. The world stopped. Not poison in the way movies showed poison. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just enough to make a dying woman die faster. Enough for nobody to question it. Enough for everyone to call it cancer. My finger tightened near the trigger. Cross saw it. You kill me. None of this leaves the mountain. I took another step. You think I care? Yes. His answer was immediate. Because Claire cared. That stopped me. Not because he deserved to live. Because he had used the one name he knew could still command me. Claire. Cross reached slowly toward the table. Her file is not the only record. He touched a black case. Treatment modifications. Physician communications. Payment transfers. Internal authorization. Signed by who? I understood you. Cross said nothing. That was enough. I lowered the pistol slightly. Not because my anger had passed. It had changed. A bullet would have been easy. Claire had not spent the last months of her life building a trail, so I could finish it with one angry decision. She wanted daylight, not revenge. I looked at Harlan. Can we copy everything? Cross laughed quietly. You still think this is a filing cabinet. I turned toward him. What does that mean? This facility monitors itself. Explain any unauthorized transfer triggers a purge. My eyes moved toward the sealed containers. What kind of purge? Electrical fire, automated ventilation failure, controlled collapse. Harlan cursed under his breath. I looked at Cross. You built a grave with an alarm. We built containment. You buried sick families and called it containment. His face hardened. You think history is clean, Commander? You think governments survive by confessing every mistake? No. I stepped closer. I think men like you survive by making everybody else pay for them. Knox stood between us now. Cross looked down at him. Something strange passed over his face, annoyance. Maybe his contempt. He saw a dog. I saw my partner, the man who had saved me overseas. The creature who could smell fear, illness, explosives, and lies long before I could put a name to them. Knox suddenly turned away from Cross. His nose lifted. Then he walked toward the right side of the chamber. Knox? He ignored me. That meant something. He followed the wall past several transport crates. Stopped, sniffed, then pawed the floor. Cross's expression changed. I noticed, what is there? Nothing. Knox scratched again. Harlan moved toward him. Cross stepped sideways. Oh, I pointed the pistol at the floor between us. Stay. He stopped. Harlan knelt near Knox. There was airflow. He ran his hand across the concrete, a cable channel. Cross said nothing. Harlan pulled a small utility knife from his medical bag and scraped at a seam. A narrow floor panel lifted. Beneath it ran communication cables. New ones, not old mine wiring fiber lines. Harlan looked at me. This chamber is connected externally. Cross's face tightened. I understood immediately. The purge system needs remote access. No answer. And remote access needs communication. Harlan smiled for the first time, a tired, astonished smile. Which means we do not have to copy the archive. I looked at him. We cross-moved. Knox moved faster. He did not attack. He simply blocked the man's path and showed enough teeth to make the message clear. Cross froze. I almost smiled. Good boy. Harlan followed the cables toward a steel service cabinet. He opened it. Inside was modern networking equipment. A satellite uplink, backup transmitters, encrypted storage units. Cross had modernized the chamber because he wanted to control it. Now the same system could expose him. Harlan studied the equipment. I cannot break their encryption. I might know somebody who can. I pulled the phone from my jacket. No signal, of course. We were hundreds of feet beneath a mountain. Harlan pointed toward the uplink unit. Emergency maintenance line. A physical handset hung inside the cabinet. I lifted it. Cross stared at me. You are making a mistake. I have made plenty. I dialed a number from memory. Not a sheriff. Not local police. Not anybody connected to Bellamy County. A man named Daniel Reyes answered on the fourth ring. Daniel and I had served together. After leaving the Navy, he had spent years working federal cyber investigations. He owed me nothing, which made him the safest person I knew. Reyes, it is Mercer. Silence, Evan. I need you to listen carefully. You sound terrible. Thank you. What happened? I am standing in an underground facility tied to illegal federal waste disposal, medical concealment, homicide, and a program connected to something we encountered in Afghanistan. Long silence. Then his voice changed, professional. Say that again. Slowly. Cross shook his head. You have no idea what you are doing. I ignored him. Reyes asked, do you have evidence? More than I can carry. Can the system connect out? Yes. Harlan read him the hardware model and terminal information. Reyes went quiet for several minutes. I watched Cross. Cross watched Knox. Knox watched everything. Finally, Reyes spoke. I found the maintenance gateway. Cross went pale. That was the moment I knew we had him. Reyes continued. I can mirror the system if you authorize the connection from inside. How? Harlan found a terminal. A prompt appeared. He read the options. One required an administrator token. I looked at Cross. He smiled thinly. You need. Knox growled. Cross glanced down. I put away the pistol. Then I walked to him. You are going to unlock it. No, you are going to unlock it because in about 5 minutes you are going to realize I am not threatening you. He frowned. I am offering you the only chance you have left. At what? Standing in a courtroom instead of dying in the mountain you built. Something shifted in his eyes. I pointed toward the containers. You said the system can trigger a collapse. Yes. Your people are already upstairs. He said nothing. You think they will protect you if this goes wrong? Silence. You think the men who buried an entire town will hesitate to bury one more executive? Cross looked toward the ceiling. For the first time, he seemed to understand his place in the system. Not commander, not architect. Evidence. Disposable evidence. The chamber lights flickered. Then an alarm sounded. Low, steady. Harlan turned toward the panel. What is that? Cross's face drained of color. Remote purge. There it was. His own people had made the decision for him. The ventilation fans changed pitch. A warning light began flashing. Harlan shouted, how long? Cross stared at the display. 11 minutes. Unlock the archive. He did no argument, no pride. He entered the code. The system opened. Reyes's voice came through the maintenance line. Files began transferring documents, scans, photographs, medical files, transport records, communications. Claire's treatment records, all of it. The progress bar moved painfully slowly. Harlan watched the alarm. 9 minutes. Cross looked toward an emergency exit on the far side of the chamber. We have to go, not yet. You want to die for files? I looked at him. No. Then I looked at Knox. I want her death to mean something. 7 minutes. Reyes said, I have enough to establish authenticity, but I need the full archive. The chamber shuddered. Dust fell from above. Knox barked. 5 minutes. A steel support groaned somewhere in the darkness. Harlan grabbed my arm. Evan, the transfer reached almost complete. Cross shouted, we leave now. I stared at the screen. Claire had died waiting for somebody to reach this room. Families had waited more than half a century. 4 minutes. Reyes's voice crackled. Done. I ripped the maintenance handset free. Move, we ran. Harlan led us toward the emergency tunnel. Knox stayed beside me. Cross followed. The first explosion came behind us. Not fire, a deep concussion. The tunnel rocked. Lights failed. We ran by Harlan's lantern. Another blast. Stone cracked overhead. Cross stumbled. I grabbed his coat and pulled him upright. He stared at me. Why? Because you are going to testify. We kept moving. The tunnel narrowed. Harlan reached a steel hatch. Jammed. He pulled. Nothing. Another explosion. Knox began scratching beside the frame. I saw what he had found. The lower hinge had bent. Back, I kicked the hinge twice. The door shifted. Cross helped, so did Harlan. Together we forced it open. Cold morning air poured inside. Knox squeezed through. Then Harlan. Cross. Me. We came out halfway up the ridge as the ground trembled beneath us. The old processing building below partially collapsed inward. Dust rose through the trees. Then silence. I fell onto wet grass. Knox dropped beside me. For several minutes, none of us moved. Then my phone found a signal. Messages began arriving. Reyes, federal authorities, people I hadn't spoken to in years. The evidence was already moving beyond anyone's ability to erase it. Copies had gone to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Justice, 3 national newspapers, 2 independent medical researchers, and a law firm representing families descended from Mercer Creek residents. Reyes had understood the assignment. Do not store truth in one place. Make it impossible to bury. Cross sat against a tree. He looked suddenly old. Harlan stood, staring down at the valley. I opened Claire's final envelope. My hands were still shaking. Evan, if you made it this far, you probably know more about my family than I ever wanted you to know. I am sorry I kept you outside this part of my life. I thought protecting you meant carrying it alone. I was wrong. You taught me something I should have understood sooner. Pain carried alone does not become lighter. It only becomes quieter. And quiet pain is where families learn to lie. My eyes blurred. Knox rested his head against my leg. I kept reading. Do not spend what is left of your life hating them. Not Randall. Not my mother. Not even the people who hurt me. Make them answer for what they did, but do not become their prisoner. There is a difference between justice and revenge. You taught me that too. I wiped my face. The final lines nearly broke me. If Black Fern ever belongs to you, give it back to the people our name failed. Build something there that tells the truth. And please take care of Knox. I know you think he belongs to you. We both know the truth. You belong to him. I laughed through tears. Spence looked up. She got you right. His tail thumped against the ground. The investigation lasted more than a year. Randall Bellamy was arrested before the first week ended. He had ordered the Black Fern purged, believing he was protecting the company. Margaret eventually testified. She admitted what she knew. She also admitted what fear had turned her into. Adrian Cross survived to stand trial. He testified too, not because he became a good man. Because once the system abandoned him, survival became more important than loyalty. The Mercer Creek records opened cases across several states. Families who had spent generations wondering why cancer, neurological illness, and birth complications followed them, finally received answers. No settlement could return the dead. No courtroom could restore Claire. But truth gave names back to people who had been reduced to numbers. That mattered. 2 years later, I stood beside Mercer Creek again. The water restoration project had begun. The old processing building was gone. The cemetery had been cleaned. Every grave had been documented. At the entrance to the valley stood a new wooden sign: Mercer Creek Memorial and Veterans Recovery Center. Claire Bellamy Mercer Foundation, Knox beside me. Gray had begun appearing around his muzzle. Mine too. The retreat served veterans, first responders, and families affected by industrial illness. No gold, no secret fortune. The Bellamy money that survived the lawsuits had been placed into medical monitoring and community restoration. That was Claire's inheritance. Not wealth, responsibility. A young veteran approached us along the trail. His German shepherd walked nervously beside him. The man looked at me. I am. They told me you started this place. I looked across the valley, at the memorial, at the rebuilt footbridge, at families walking beside a creek that no longer had to hide what happened there. No, I rested my hand on Knox's head. My wife did. The veteran nodded. Knox walked toward his dog slowly, calmly. The younger shepherd hesitated, then stepped forward. Their noses touched. The veteran's shoulders relaxed. I knew that feeling. The first moment when something inside you realizes the world may not always be dangerous. I looked toward the ridge where black fern once hidden behind trees. Claire had left me a road. I thought it led to an inheritance. Then I thought it led to revenge. I had been wrong both times. It led me to the truth, and that did not give me my wife back. It did something smaller, harder, more useful. It gave me a reason to keep living without her. Knox returned to my side. I scratched the gray fur beneath his chin. You ready? His tail moved once. Yeah, we walked toward the center together. For most of my life, I believed strength meant standing when everyone else fell. Claire taught me something different. Sometimes strength means opening the door everyone before you was too afraid to open. And sometimes the bravest thing a man can do after losing everything is decide that what remains still belongs to tomorrow. Knox leaned against my leg. I looked down at him, then toward the people waiting ahead. And we kept walking. Together, some wounds never disappear completely. But Evan learned that healing does not always mean forgetting what happened. Sometimes it means refusing to let pain have the final word. Claire could not undo the wrongs committed before her, and Evan could not bring Claire back. What they could do was make sure the truth served someone after them. That may be the quiet lesson of Mercer Creek. What we inherit is not always ours to keep. Sometimes it is ours to repair. And if this story stayed with you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you do not miss the next story in our channel. There are still many stories about loyalty, second chances, and the people and dogs who find a way forward together.